The first time German spotters glimpsed the silhouette of the B-17 Flying Fortress in 1942, it felt like an omen. Against the pale sky, the bomber's shape seemed almost alien. Broad wings stretched wide, its tail fin tall and proud, its fuselage bristling with machine guns glinting in the sun. German intelligence officers, already familiar with British bombers, immediately sensed something different. The B-17 was not just another intruder in their skies. It carried itself with a defiance that unsettled even before a single bomb was dropped. German pilots who intercepted early formations over France reported the same unnerving impression. This was no fragile aircraft rushing to unload and escape. Instead, the fortress lumbered forward with a kind of terrifying inevitability, a flying citadel that refused to be cowed by flak or fighters. To many Luftwaffe crews, it felt as though they were looking at the future of warfare itself, an aircraft that turned daylight bombing from theory into reality. But first impressions were not only about size and shape. Survivors of initial clashes described the sound as unforgettable. A formation of B-17s, with their Wright Cyclone engines droning in synchronized thunder, rolled across the landscape like an oncoming storm. Villagers on the ground, German soldiers in their barracks, and anti-aircraft gunners manning their posts all remembered the same sensation. The deep hum that announced devastation was moments away. It was not merely an airplane's noise, it was the sound of inevitability. And yet, within the Luftwaffe's command structure, there was a mix of awe and doubt. Some believed the bomber's many defensive guns would prove little more than decoration, that German fighters would carve through them as they had done with RAF bombers. Others, however, warned that the Americans had built something fundamentally different, a machine meant not to flee, but to fight its way through hostile skies. And before we dive deeper into the B-17's terrifying reputation, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it with fellow history enthusiasts, because the story of what Germany thought of the Flying Fortress is only beginning. In those first encounters, Germany learned one thing above all. The Fortress was not just another bomber. It was a challenge. When German engineers finally studied captured fragments of downed B-17s, they were forced to admit something few wanted to say aloud. The Americans had built a bomber that was, in many ways, ahead of its time. The first detail that stunned them was the sheer ruggedness of its frame. Constructed with a strong internal structure of aluminum alloy, the Fortress could absorb damage that would rip lesser aircraft apart. Luftwaffe pilots repeatedly reported B-17s flying home with engines aflame, wings shredded, and fuselages riddled with cannon fire, yet still managing to cross the channel. To the Germans, this resilience was both maddening and fascinating. Then came its defenses. The nickname Flying Fortress was no empty boast. With up to 13 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns placed in nose, dorsal, ventral, waist, and tail positions, a single bomber could cover nearly every angle of approach. German fighters learned quickly that head-on attacks were suicidal, while tail pursuits turned into duels with the lethal tail gunner. Luftwaffe pilots who had once flown with confidence against British bombers suddenly realized that attacking a fortress was closer to storming a fortress wall, where every window had a sniper. Equally impressive was the Norden bomb sight, a piece of American technology that allowed bombardiers to aim with unprecedented accuracy from high altitude. German analysts, who initially dismissed Allied bombing as clumsy and indiscriminate, grew uneasy when factories, marshalling yards, and oil plants were struck with alarming precision. The very idea that an aircraft flying 6 miles up could place bombs within a small radius unsettled German commanders who had long relied on dispersion as a natural shield. And yet, admiration came laced with frustration. Engineers noted that the B-17's range and payload were not superior to every bomber in the war. The Heinkel He 177, for example, could technically carry heavier loads. But while the He-177 was plagued with engine fires and unreliability, the fortress demonstrated a quality that mattered most: consistency. Mission after mission, formation after formation, it arrived where it was needed. For Germany, the B-17's technical strength was not just a blueprint of metal and rivets, it was a revelation of industrial discipline. The fortress embodied a nation's ability to mass-produce reliability, and that realization sent a chill through German strategists. When the B-17 finally entered full-scale combat over occupied Europe, Germany's initial doubts turned into hard reality. By late 1942 and throughout 1943, formations of hundreds of flying fortresses began thundering across the skies toward key industrial and military targets. Unlike British night bombers, these American giants chose the most dangerous path: daylight precision bombing. For the Luftwaffe, it was both a test and a nightmare. German fighter pilots soon realized that a B-17 in isolation could be vulnerable, but the Americans never sent them alone. Instead, they arrived in tight box formations where overlapping fields of machine gun fire created a deadly web. Luftwaffe veterans compared attacking these formations to flying headlong into a wall of tracers. Even the most seasoned pilots, including aces like Adolf Galland, admitted that charging a formation of fortresses felt like suicide. The results were staggering on both sides. In battles such as the raids on Bremen, Regensburg, and Schweinfurt, Luftwaffe squadrons threw themselves at the bombers with ferocity, sometimes destroying dozens in a single mission. Yet the cost was crippling. Fighters returned riddled with bullets. Many pilots never came back, and morale steadily eroded. One German pilot recalled that facing a mass of fortresses was like diving into a furnace that spat fire in every direction. Ground observers witnessed a grim paradox: columns of smoke rising from burning cities, while crippled bombers still clawed their way back toward England. Germans could not ignore the psychological weight of seeing aircraft torn apart, yet refusing to fall. The sight of a B-17, engines failing but wings still level, left a lasting impression on civilians and soldiers alike. What shocked German commanders most was the persistence. Even after catastrophic losses, such as the bloody Schweinfurt-Regensburg missions, where over 60 bombers failed to return, the Americans came back again within weeks. To Germany, this was more than military stubbornness. It was a display of industrial might and a will to continue regardless of cost. In combat, the Flying Fortress proved its name. It was not invincible, but it was relentless. And Germany realized that every engagement drained the Luftwaffe more than it weakened the bombers. For the German people, the arrival of the B-17 was not just a military threat. It became a daily terror written into the skies. By 1943, the steady drone of engines overhead was no longer an unfamiliar sound, but a constant reminder that destruction could arrive at any hour. Civilians described the sight of endless bomber streams as overwhelming, a mechanical tide blotting out the daylight. Even before bombs fell, the fortress itself carried a weight of intimidation. Psychologists within the Nazi regime noted the despair spreading among factory workers, railway crews, and city dwellers who lived under constant bombardment. Unlike earlier raids, which were sporadic, the precision daylight strikes of the B-17 felt unrelenting. One German diarist wrote that the bombers came like clockwork, as if the sky itself had joined the enemy. The psychological message was clear: no matter where you hid, American steel and industry could reach you. For Luftwaffe pilots, the strain was equally devastating. Many admitted that attacking B-17 formations demanded nerves of iron. The wall of defensive fire often left even aces shaken. Surviving pilots reported trembling hands after missions, describing the feeling as flying into a storm where death could come from any angle. Losses mounted, and with them came fear. Confidence, once the Luftwaffe's greatest weapon, began to erode. Even Germany's leadership felt the impact. Reports delivered to Hitler spoke not only of destroyed factories, but of collapsing morale. The notion that bombers could survive massive flak barrages, withstand swarms of fighters, and still return to base was infuriating. For propaganda purposes, the regime painted the B-17 as clumsy and vulnerable, but within military circles, the truth was admitted quietly. The Americans had built a weapon that could not easily be stopped. The psychological warfare extended beyond destruction. The B-17 symbolized inevitability. For Germans on the ground, each raid reinforced the idea that defeat was approaching, carried on silver wings across the sky. The sound of those engines became a soundtrack of dread, a reminder that the war was shifting, and no fortress, not even Germany itself, was beyond reach. When the war finally ended in 1945, the B-17 flying fortress had carved its place in both Allied pride and German memory. To the Americans, it became a symbol of resilience and precision. But to Germany, its legacy was more complicated. A mixture of respect, fear, and bitter acknowledgement of its role in shaping the outcome of the conflict. Captured German reports after the war revealed grudging admiration. Many Luftwaffe officers admitted that the B-17 had been one of the most formidable challenges they faced. Its defensive formations forced the Luftwaffe to adapt tactics, divert precious resources, and endure staggering losses. In hindsight, some German commanders even suggested that no other Allied aircraft placed such sustained pressure on Germany's defenses. For civilians, the memory of the B-17 was tied to fire, rubble, and displacement. Cities like Hamburg, Berlin, and Dresden bore the scars of relentless bombing campaigns. Survivors recalled the constant fear as thousands of tons of bombs rained down from high altitudes. Though the Lancaster and other bombers inflicted devastation as well, the sight of the flying fortress in broad daylight left a different impression. Germany's vulnerability laid bare under the glaring sun. In the post-war years, German aviation engineers studied downed B-17s closely, recognizing the durability of their construction and the efficiency of their design. Some of these lessons influenced post-war European aircraft development. Even adversaries could not deny the technical achievement that allowed the aircraft to sustain crippling damage, yet still carry its crews home. The psychological shadow also endured. For many Germans, the droning engines of the B-17 became a haunting echo of inevitability, proof that no matter how fiercely the Reich fought, Allied production and persistence would eventually overwhelm them. The flying fortress embodied the industrial strength that Nazi Germany could never match. In the end, Germany's view of the B-17 was not of disdain, but of reluctant respect. It was an enemy machine that earned its name, one that battered the Reich from the skies and left behind a legacy written in both destruction and awe. The flying fortress had not just bombed Germany, it had broken its spirit.